Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. I've been trying to add a lot more whimsy to a lot of my personal designs and coding recently because those kinds of interactions can make for a much better experience for the user and kind of keeps them interested in whatever you're doing. Well, recently I was trying to show a fundraising goal being met, and I came up with one of those whimsy animations. And if you scroll down here, you can see that we've got numbers counting up. It comes here, these things pop up saying how much has been raised, how much is yet to raise, and kind of what the target goal is. And I did all this with HTML, CSS, and just a little bit of JavaScript. And so whether you're brand new and you're not sure where to start, or whether you're seasoned and you have some ways to improve this, because I think there are some ways to make this better, I hope we'll have something here for everyone. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so I've got kind of the base boilerplate set up, and I will leave a link to that code pin in the description if you want to jump in. First of all, what we're going to do is work on the HTML. Then I'm going to show you how to do the CSS, and then we're going to kind of jazz it up with a couple of important things using intersection observers in JavaScript and a couple other things that I'll show you. All right, so just to let you kind of walk you through what we've got so far here, I've got an HTML page that's got nothing much yet going on, and then I've got a style sheet here that is linked up. And I've done a few kind of basic resets to start with. Number one, I brought in open props. If you're not sure what open props is, it's by Adam Argyle. Basically, it's just a collection of kind of scaled and connected CSS variables that you can use to build out a site. So you're writing your own CSS, but rather than having to determine like what sizes am I going to have and what font sizes am I going to have, you've got a scalable system that you can just grab from when you need it and use it. And that's what I've got here. I've also grabbed a Google font here, this Enter Google font, and I'll add links to all these in the description. Then I've got a basic reset. I've also got a section here for removing animations and transitions for people who don't want that kind of stuff, so who prefer reduced motion. And I grabbed this from Andy Bell's reset. So I just grabbed this section right down here. And again, I'll leave a link in the description for this. Because we're doing all these animations, some people may not want that. And if they say they don't want it, I don't want it to be on the site. All right, also I've set up some basic colors that we're going to be using here, and then I've got this number variable, and I'll show you how we're going to use that to kind of count up to that number of 49. Everything else is pretty basic. You can see I'm starting to pull in some of these open props. So here I've got my body as display grid, place item center, and then for the gap, I'm using one of these pre-built things from open props. Same thing with the font size, and then I've got a text block, and that has the same kind of stuff. It has a max width, padding in line, that would be left and right. Margin in line, the same kind of thing. This H1 as well, same kind of thing. Font size, padding, background color, all these are coming from open props or my own CSS variables. All right, so that's what we've got set. So down here, we're going to actually build everything else. I've got nothing right now in my JavaScript, and so we'll be writing that all from scratch. So let's do this first of all just by working on the HTML. So I'm going to come over here and then I'm going to go ahead and click Go Live. This is an extension called Live Server, and so now I can just type, and as I save stuff, it'll actually populate right over this way. So I've got this whole section here, and it's at the bottom that we want to add all this. And the reason I'm doing it like this is because when it comes to real use cases, you're going to actually want to make it to where these animations don't appear unless they're actually on the screen. Otherwise, all your hard work will not be seen by anyone. So I've got to keep it low enough in the page that we will need that, and I'll show you how to do that towards the end of the video. All right, so just below this text block container, which holds all of this, we're going to add that little section that will be our aside. That's where we're going to have the little slider that will say how much has been raised. So I'm going to come in here and say aside. And then at the top here, I'm going to have another H2 that's just going to say the target fundraising goal. And everything else is going to be inside of a div called progress wrapper. So progress wrapper, just like that. And everything is going to live inside here. We're going to have a bunch of position absolute items, and all that is going to be controlled by this wrapper. All right, next we're going to have a paragraph, and that's going to have our top section here. If I come back over here, that will have this 49% in it. So I'm just going to call that progress label, like that. And we'll have a couple other things we add in here, but for now, the one thing I want to add is an aria hidden, and we're going to set this to true. Basically, what I want is for this not to read out the number. Instead, I'm going to control what gets read with assistive technology in another way. So we'll go ahead and just leave that actually with nothing in it yet. We're going to populate that later. And then next, we've got these little kind of floating bubble areas. So right here, then we're going to work on this, and then we'll work on this final bubble area. So let's come in here next, and let's call this bubble, all right? And then we've got a bubble top, so this will be different than the bubble bottom. So we'll just leave it like that. And this one we actually do want to say funds raised. And once again, I actually don't want this to be read out. We will control that in another way. So I'm going to say aria hidden equals true. All right, so we're good there. Next, we've got the little progress container, that actual pill itself. Before I do that, I realize this should be a paragraph tag. Sorry about that. And same thing here. All right, so let's go ahead and add that progress container. There is an HTML element that's meant to show the progress of something over a certain range, and that actually is the progress tag, just like that. Now there's some special attributes that come in here. First of all, let's go ahead and just give this an ID of raised, and I'll space some of this out so it's a little bit easier to read. Next, you want to give it a max value. This would be the maximum you allow the whole thing to get to, the slider. The most it would take up would be our full total amount we're trying to raise, which is $250,000. Next, you're going to give it the value. So this would be the amount that is currently raised at this point. And finally, when assistive technology reads this, it'll actually read 49%. So it'll actually do the calculation itself and know that it's 49%. So what I want to do is actually, since it's already going to read this out, let's go ahead and add an aria label here. And it will simply read out how much we've raised and how much we've got left to raise. And then right after it reads that, it will say 49% progress. And so that's what we want. And I'll show you that at the end if I can remember. Now, if we go back to the final example here, you're going to see that I've got numbers here and numbers here. All those things are going to live inside of something called a progress overlay. So it'll have those two text areas in it. So let's come just below here. And again, this will say progress overlay. And this div will hold two paragraphs. It'll first of all hold our amount that's been given. And then just below that, it will also hold the amount that is remaining. Now I do need to add classes to both of these, so let's go ahead and do that. So let's call these both text, and then in this case it'll be text raised for the top one, and then this bottom one will be text remaining. Now I also want to come in here and add once again aria hidden equals true, because the whole idea here is that we're just controlling what's read out here, and rather than having to go and read out funds raised, 123, all that kind of stuff, they can just basically get a summary statement right here of what the entire image is supposed to communicate. All right, finally, I know we're going to need another bubble. So let's come down here just below this progress overlay, and I'm going to add this in here. And the only difference is that this is going to read out bubble bottom, and this will say yet to raise. So if we save this and come back over this way, there it is, all there, right there in its beauty. There's nothing going on yet. We've got to style all of this. So we do have our bubbles right here. We've got the progress itself. We've got a div that's holding our numbers. That'll be the overlay over the top of those. All right, so we'll call that HTML good to go. We're going to change some stuff on it in a little bit, but for now, let's go ahead and come over to the CSS. And this is actually where we're going to spend a lot of our time. So let's first of all start by grabbing that aside. All right, so first thing we're going to do is add a display of grid here, and then we're going to place items center. And the idea here is we want everything to be in the very center of that section. Now, it's going to be hard to see this if it keeps jumping up and down. So let's go ahead and, can we kill a bunch of this? Let's just kill this for now, like that. All right, so now it's up top, and we will uncomment that out in a second. Next, I want to grab a gap, and here I'm going to go ahead and reach for one of those pre-built things from OpenProps. I've done a video explaining how to get started with OpenProps. If you're interested in that, I'll try to remember to leave a link in the description. All right, next we're going to have padding, and this would be first of all up and down. I want my size fluid of 3, and then let's go ahead and repeat this. So that would be the up. Now this is going to be side to side. And then for the bottom, we're going to go ahead and add it as a larger amount because we're going to have a background color, and the way that bottom bubble bumps out, we actually want a little bit more space on the bottom. Speaking of our background color, let's go ahead and add that now. And I've got this in a cream color. Now you may have noticed that I'm actually wrapping this variable in an HSL wrapper, and that's because the way I set this up top here, it actually doesn't have those. That's just how I prefer to do it. That way I can come in and add an alpha channel very easily. So let's go ahead and save this, and I'll show you what I mean. So if I were to come in here instead, and let's say I want to add an alpha channel, all I have to do is do a / and like 0.4, and now suddenly it's a lot more opaque, even though that's hard to see against a white background. So that's how I like to set those up, and that's why I've done it that way. Now, in order for this to go all the way across, it does need to be a width of 100%. And then we'll set the color here to our variable of dark that I've set up top. And then text align will be to the center. And I'll go ahead and save that. All right, now I do want this to have a little bit of a drop shadow on it. And there is something pre-built that I could use from OpenProps. It's just called shadow, and then I'll give it like a shadow 3, something like that. Actually, maybe let's back that off just a touch, make it a little bit lighter, maybe shadow 2 or 1. There we go. All right, now I can actually change the color of the shadow. If I were to inspect this, in fact, let's go ahead and do that now, and I'll just show you how Open Props works. So if I come in here and click on this box shadow, you're going to see that it's a calculation of a bunch of different things, but one of the things is this shadow color, which means it's really easy for me to adjust this according to my own color themes. And the way that they've done all these things, they've set it up really smart to where everything has zero specificity by default. So if I come up here, you'll notice it's all a where selector on the HTML itself. So this has like zero specificity. All right, so you can override it very easily. And in this case, I'm just going to override it inside of this aside tag. So let's come in here and let's just say shadow color. And this time I'm going to set it to my var of, let's use this cream color. Now I actually need to wrap this in HSL, not var, because the way I've got that set up. And now the color actually shifts to that. Just to show you how that's working, if I come in here and say red, you'll see that there's just a slight tint of red there. Probably easier to see with a bigger shadow like that. And it's actually using that red to kind of color that shadow just a touch. So let's move this back. We'll go cream, and that should work nice. Maybe let's change this to olive. That way it's just a touch darker. Anyhow, all that to say, you can kind of customize these open props and really make your own system, and that's the intention. It doesn't override all your CSS. It just gives you superpowers when you want them. All right, now everything else inside of here is inside of a div called Progress Wrapper. You might remember that. So I'll come in here, Progress Wrapper. Again, this will be display grid, and let's set a gap on here of size 4. I'll make sure it's width 100%, so it goes all the way across, and a max width of 300 pixels. And finally, I need to make sure that I've got this set to position relative, because I've got several absolute things we're going to position inside of this container. All right, next I've got a progress label. And you might remember that's going to actually hold that little 49%, but we're actually going to add it directly in the CSS. And we're going to use a cool property that's only actually available in Chromium browsers, but we'll create a fallback here for everything else. Even though this will be hard to see here, I need to go ahead and add a color, even though you can't see anything yet there, but I want this to be my olive color. And then I want this to have margin on the bottom. So we'll say margin block end, and this will be at my var size of 4. Finally, I want my font size itself to be var font size 0, so it's a very small font size. And then everything we're going to add is actually going to be in the after element. So let's grab our progress label and we're going to add an after element here. We're going to use a counter reset. So what this is it's a custom counter within CSS where you could just count things on the page. Here we're giving it a name, and then we're going to point it to our variable of num. Now you might remember at the very, very top, I actually showed you that at the beginning. Let's see, where is it? Right here. So my number is 49, so I'm pointing it to this variable right here. The content then here is going to be counter, and then I'm going to give it my name, which is num. And then right after that, I want it to have a % sign. So if I save, now you see it pop up there, and now all of our work on those colors shows up. Now, I might actually need that to be a little bit darker, but maybe let's set this to a dark color, so it's maybe a little bit easier to see, but I'm just going to leave it at olive. All right, next, this needs to be position of absolute. And then by default, I actually want it to be all the way over on the left. So it's going to move with that slider eventually, and you can see that right now, that means it's all the way over here. And actually, now that I think about it, it shouldn't be all the way on the side. So we must have some kind of problem because it's supposed to be capped here at 300 pixels. So let's come back over here. And let's see, oh, here's the progress wrapper. That should be a div. And let's save it. Okay, so that fixed the problem. So I must have changed that tag. Maybe you caught that already. All right, let's come back over this way. Now that's starting all the way on the left. The next thing I want to do is change the font weight here to bold. And then I want to go ahead and move it its own width transform. We're going to do translate X. We'll do it back 50%. So we're going to move it back its own width just a little bit, so it's exactly in the middle of wherever we set it. So in this case, it'll be starting at 0, but once we get it to 49%, it'll be exactly over that other little pill that we create. Now this next little piece is going to be a little bit hard to see, but what I want is for the top here to be set to my var size of 2. And if I remember correctly, this is 0.5 rem, but I actually want to change this, and there's no direct open prop that connects with this value, so I could either custom write my own one in here, or what I can do once again is just overwrite that locally here within this scope. So say my size 2 is now equal to 0.75 rem, something like that. So now it's a little bit more precise with where I want it in relationship to this pill that will be showing up down below. Now, actually, let's go ahead and just do that now so that we can see what's going on, and then we'll come back up and add a couple things up here. So we've grabbed our progress container. This is our pill itself. This we want to be position of relative, and then background color here will be my HSL of off-white. I'll set my height to a var of size 8. And then for my border radius, once again, OpenProps does have something here called radius round. All right, so let's go ahead and save that and see it pop in. All right, perfect. Next, I want overflow hidden on here, and that way things outside of it don't show. I want it to be over the other things that'll show in the DOM here, so let's set this to like 20 or something like that for the Z index. Then I'm going to set a box shadow here to a var shadow 2. Now, ideally, I want this shadow itself to have the same coloring as the one up above. So why don't I come back up here? And where was that? I think on my aside where I customized that right here. Yeah, so let's go ahead and kill that. And I'm going to move that up top here, and we'll just change it everywhere. So everywhere we use a shadow, it will have this hue to it. All right, let's come back down this way then. This progress container itself is going to have a before element where we're going to do lots of fun stuff. So let's go ahead and add that before right here. This is going to be the actual pill itself, that green color pill that I showed you at the very beginning. So position absolute, and then we need a content here, so we'll say content of nothing. And then we can change several of these things. We'll get rid of that overflow hidden. We'll leave that Z index, that should work. Let's get rid of this box radius. Let's get rid of this box shadow. And then back up here, let's set the inset, which this is the same as top, left, right, and bottom, all to 0. And then we'll set a width to 0 as well. We're going to control this with an animation, and then a height to 100%. So if I were to change this width to something like 40%, then you can see it hopefully showing up right over that way. Now let's change this background color to olive, and that way it shows in that green color. And then let's go ahead and set this width back to 0. Again, we're going to control this with an animation. Now I've got this pesky little progress bar, even though that's the thing that's actually reading out to screen readers and to like Google when it sees this section. I do want to go ahead and just set the progress here itself so that actual HTML element to an opacity of 0 so that it hides. I don't want to see it on the page. Now both of the numbers that I've gotten here, one you can't see and one you can see right here, both of these are actually inside of a container, you might remember, and we named that progress overlay. So we'll say progress overlay. And that's a class. And here we're going to say display a flex, and then I want it to be all the way to the sides, so we'll do justify content space between, and then I want them to be aligned centrally, so align items to the center, and this will be position absolute, the entire container will be. So let's set it like that. We want it to be halfway down the top, and then we also want it to be left 1 rem and right 1 rem. So it's not going to go all the way to the sides of this pill. It'll stop about right here and about right here. So 1 rem either way. Now, if I save it here, you're going to see they pull up here, but this is the top where they're stopping. So now I need to translate it itself up about 50%. So we'll say transform, and then this will be translate y negative 50%. Now again, I want this to be over the top of everything else, so I'll set this to Z of 20, and all these things should work just fine. That after element will be below them. And then I'm going to set the font weight here to bold. If I save it, there they go, right where I want them to go. That's perfect. Now for the text itself, I do need that right one, which had the class of text raised. I need it to have a white color. So let's set that to off white, just like that. Oh, and this needs to say color. All right, there we go. So you're not gonna be able to see it yet, but if I were to come, let's see, back up this way and change this width again to something like my 49%, you'll see that it shows up right over that, which is perfect. All right, let's put that back. The next things I need to do is work on these little bubbles. All right, right now they're kind of in the way and they're messing up everything else because they're not yet positioned absolute, which is how I want them to be positioned. So either of them, left or right, will have that position of absolute. And so if I do that, now everything should snap more into place where I want it to be. This is going to have a background color here, and it will have my off-white as well. And then for color, I want this to have the olive color of the text itself. Font size is going to be the same as that 49%. So we're going to set that to font size of 0, so it's real small once again. And then for my border radius, I also want this to be the radius of round. So I want it to be fully rounded. I do want it to have some padding, and I want this to have up and down size of 1, And left and right, there's not really a size that works in open props. Again, I could write my own custom one, or I can just come in here and grab that size 3 and redefine it within this scope to 0.75 rem, which I think is what I redefined as size 2 up top, but it doesn't matter. That's the nice thing about scoping these variables like this. Next, and finally, we'll have a box shadow here of our shadow, let's see, shadow 5. So a little bit of a bigger shadow. And now you can see it showing up right underneath there. Now again, both of these bubbles, whether it's the top one or the bottom one, they will both have an before pseudo element that we're going to use. So let's say content here will be nothing. And then we'll set this border right to be 4 pixels. And that should be border here. So it'll be 4 pixels solid transparent. What we're wanting to do is create a little fake triangle, and you'll see that here in just a second. Let's copy this down, and this will be for my left. And then I'll have to actually set which direction the triangle goes on the bubble top or the bubble bottom. So we'll just leave it alone right now. So you're not going to be able to see anything quite yet. But this whole thing should be position of absolute. And then I want it to be left of 50%. So in other words, the arrow is going to be in the exact middle is what we want. So 50% over. And then if you've worked with these kinds of absolute position of things, you know we've got to translate this back. Its own width, 50%. All right, so again, you're not going to be able to see anything quite yet, but we're getting to that. Let's first of all work on the bubble top. So I'll say bubble top, and this I want it to be left of var size 4, and then top will be var size 2. So it should move right in about the position I want it to be. Let's go ahead and copy this down and now do something for the bottom one. Now in this case, I want it to be on the right, and I want it to be on the bottom. So if I move it like this, now it should move itself down over here. Let's see, what did I mess up? I think I need extra dashes here. All right, there we go. So it is right there. You can see it right above those numbers. Now for this right one, we're going to have to change around a few things here. I actually want it to be a little bit bigger, and then I need it to be down. So the way you can change these custom variables here, and this works for any CSS variables, not just things through open props, is you can calculate them, and so I'll set it in there like that, times a negative number. So we'll do like negative 1.1, I think should be about right. And so it moves it down below. Now you can't see it because it has a overflow hidden there. So we also need to fix that. So let's do a little live debugging here. Okay, so I've got padding here. This has an overflow hidden. Let's see, let's look at our progress container. Do I need this on here? I don't think I do. So let's take that off. I think that's messing us up. Okay, because that is position where we want it, and there's no reason that anything else should overflow here. Oh, you know what? I think what we need is these elements here need to be position overflow. So let's set it like this. So let's grab this right here, and this overlay, let's set the position overflow hidden on that. And I think that will work for us. All right, finally, let's go ahead and finish these arrows so you can actually see them. So let's start with the bubble top here. And for this before pseudo element, it's already got all this content on it. So now I need to just change around a couple of things. Let's grab this right here, and let's grab this before pseudo element, and let's paste this in here. And maybe as weird as this sounds, you're going to set a border top on this and set this to a color, which will be the same as that background off-white color. So HSL here of off-white. All right, so now it's actually right there. I don't know if you can see it, so let's actually move it. So we'll say bottom, and here I'm just going to say negative 4 pixels. All right, so there it is showing up just below here. What I've done is set 2 transparent borders and 1 top border, and it creates a little fake triangle. So that's a nice little trick for you. Let's go ahead and grab all of this now and come down this way. And we're going to grab the bottom and change this to bottom, and we will change this to top. And now we've got a little top one and a little bottom one showing for us. All right, now we've got just one more thing we need to do in this kind of basic version of the whole thing, and that is only going to work in Chromium browsers. But since we've already got this fallback of this 49%, that should work well in Firefox and Safari and other things like that. But I actually want it to count up. And if I come back over this way and I refresh, you'll see here that it actually counts up and moves over. So let's first of all just work on the counting up. So let's come back over this way. And what I'm going to do is create something called an @ property. And what we're doing here is basically defining a variable and giving it a lot more information than you otherwise would normally be able to give in CSS. So I'm going to grab my number property, and then I'm going to tell it some stuff about it. So I'm going to say its syntax here is that it is an integer. Next, I'm going to set its initial value here to 0. And then I'm going to say it inherits false. Finally, let's come down here and write some keyframes. And here I'm going to just call this, let's call this progress text. So progress text. And I'm going to say it's going to go from, and first of all, we're going to set this left of 0%. So we're going to define two things here, both it moving from here all the way over, and also updating this number to go from 0 to that 49%. So we're going to say from, first of all, and then we'll say to, and both of these things, first of all, left will be 49%, and then secondly, the num is going to go all the way to 49. Now, if you'll see here, I set this to 0 to start with, this custom property, and now I'm saying it's got to move all the way here. And Chrome and Chromium browsers will actually animate this property. Now let's come up top here and grab our progress label, because that's what we want to set it on. And we want to set it on that after pseudo element. So let's go ahead and actually copy this down, because we're going to actually only use it at a certain time. So for now, what I'm going to do is just leave it like this, but we'll actually update that in a second. So we'll say animation progress text here. I want it to go for 2 seconds. And then I'm going to paste in a cubic Bezier curve I've got on my clipboard, and we'll say forwards. So if I save this, now it should move up that way. All right, and nothing is happening. So let's come down here and see what's going on. So progress text, keyframes from left 0 to left there. That's not working. Let's see what else could be going on. And it turns out that spelling helps. This should be 2, and now there it moves and it counts up. So that's pretty cool. Now, in Safari and in Firefox, this will actually just start at 49 and stay at 49 and just move along with it. But it's not like it's broken or anything. It just doesn't count. So it's cooler in Chrome, so that's why I'm showing it to you in Chrome. All right, now we've got one more thing to do, and we're going to copy this keyframe down. We'll call this progress width, and we're going to just set this from whatever it's at, which would be 0 right now, to a width of 49%. So let's save this here and then come up top. What I need to find is my progress container, and here it is up here. So let's copy this down, and once again, I'm going to remove all the rest of this, and I'll just replace it with that animation. And in this case, I've just grabbed it off my clipboard, but basically I've got a progress width, 2 seconds, same cubic Bezier curve, and forwards. So if I save this here, they should move together just like that, and they do. Cool. Now I'm seeing now that I've got this kind of weird overflow starting at the beginning, so maybe I do actually need this overflow hidden. And then I think it may just be my markup is once again off. So let's come back over this way, and I think I just need to pop this out one level. There we go. So now it shows up down below. Okay, cool. So everything is working as expected. Now we don't have these little fading animations, and we also, if I were to restore all the stuff that we hid up here, you're going to see that when I come down here, the animation is already done. So that's the point I was saying at the beginning, where if you do all this work, you actually want it to show for people. And so that's what we want to do here. So let's first of all worry about those fades. All right, so let's comment that back out. All right, so if you're keeping track, this is kind of stage 2, where we're going to add some fading, and then finally we'll worry about it only loading once it's actually on the page or in the viewport. So what I'm going to do is add a bunch of classes here. So we're going to have fade up, and that will be on our bubble top. On the bubble bottom, I want this to fade down. On this text array, so the one over here, I want it to fade right. And then over here, I want this to fade left. So it should come in from the right to the left and from the left to the right. Now we're going to use these classes to basically make sure that everything moves in the direction we want it to at the right time. With each of these, we might want them to actually start and end at a different time. So we can actually set that up with a custom data attribute. So let's first of all start with these bubbles here. I'm going to say that my data-delay, which is just the name I happen to give this. You can name this whatever you want. Let's set this to something like 2000, which will end up being 2 seconds, so 2000 milliseconds. All right, I'm actually going to use that exact same thing on here and here and here. So the other three I already added stuff to. We'll do that exact same delay. All right, so let's actually move this right here. All right, so we're going to actually read this in our JavaScript. And now we're ready to actually write a little bit of JavaScript. Let me come back over to my style sheet. And I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and we're going to add a couple of other properties. Now, for sake of time, because these are not difficult to understand, I'm just going to paste them in here. I've just grabbed all 4 of these, the fade up, down, left, and right, set them into an opacity of 0, and then set a transition on their transform and on their opacity. So if I save this, those should all disappear and they're gone. All right, so we don't want that necessarily, but what I do want to do is add some extra things. So I actually want it to move. In this case, it's going to start down lower, and then it will raise up. And for the fade down, it's going to start up higher and moved over. Same thing with left and right. So I'm using a 3D here because it's more performant. It actually engages like the graphical engine of the browser, if I understand that correctly. So that's why I'm using 3D instead of like just Y or X or whatever. And then whenever I add a class of faded to it, it's basically going to go back to its default, whatever it happens to be, and have full opacity. So if I come over here and refresh, they're all going to go away to start with, and then they'll show back up. All right, now it is time to actually hook up the JavaScript so that these things happen at the proper time. So what we want is both those fades, up, right, left, and down, and the animations to wait until everything is on screen. So let's jump over to our app.js file, and I did go ahead and link this at the top of the page, but what I'm going to do is write some intersection observers, and I've done some videos recently on how to do these, so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail just to keep this as short as possible, but if you have questions, go ahead and check those videos out. So let's first of all say const fade observer, that's what I'm going to call it, and then we'll just pass it new intersection observer. Now this is just part of JavaScript itself, so it's this class that I can reference. And this takes two things, as you can see there in the dropdown. I've got a callout and some options. So this would be a function basically and an options. All right, so let's go ahead and wait on that. We actually need to write that in a second. But first of all, I need to grab anything I want to pass to this observer. So let's just call this like fade else. So anything that has, let's see, let's spread into here, document.query selector all. What I want to do is grab anything with a fade up class. Let's see, like that. And then comma here, let's copy this down a few times. I also want fade down. I also want fade right. And I also want fade left. And what do I want to do with these fade L's? Well, I want to say fade L's dot for each. So let's loop through these. And we'll just say for each L, we want to pass it to my fade observer dot observes. This is a method that lives on that. So dot observe, and then we'll pass it our L. Now, I'm not going to say this yet because we're going to get yelled at because we haven't done anything with this. So we're going to be getting a list of entries and running a function in here. Now, you can have this as a separate callback, or you can just write it inline. In this case, I think I'll just write it inline because it'll be all compact and kind of in the same area. So let's go ahead and just call this something like L's to fade or something like that. And then this needs to be an arrow function just like this. We'll say L's to fade here for each of these. So for each element here, then what I want to do, console.log L. All right, so if that's all gibberish to you, let's just go ahead and look over here and see what's going on. So if I come over here, you're going to notice that I get these intersection observers. I have 4 things that have one of these classes on them, so that's why I'm getting 4 of these intersection observer entries. And inside of here, I've got a bunch of different things. The one I'm interested in is it intersecting? In other words, is it on the viewport at all? And if it is, it's going to give me this true. So that's what I want to actually judge everything off of. So if my L.is_intersecting, and this is true, then what I want to do is I want to go ahead and say L.target. And if I were to look over here, you're going to see that this intersection observer not only gives me access to like if it's on the screen, but it actually gives me the thing it was set against, this target itself. .ClassList.add, and what I want to add is my faded. Let's go ahead and save that. And now that they're all on the screen, you're going to see they pop out and they do their little fading animation. So this one goes to the right, this one goes to the left, this one goes up, and this one goes down. Now there's a couple things we need to kind of do to customize this. Remember, we've got those delays on them. So what I actually want to do is set this whole thing right here inside of a set timeout. So I'll say set timeout, and this itself needs to be a function. And so we'll tell it to do that. And then inside here, you can actually pass it the delay. Now in this case, there are a couple of options. One would be I just don't have anything. So let's go ahead and set 0 as like a default. So we'll say or that. But if there is an actual data delay attribute, I actually want to use that number instead. Now it's going to pass back a string. So let's course it into a number. And we'll say L.target.get attribute. And the attribute I want to get would be my data-delay. So if we've done this correctly and I save it here, they should delay and then they should pop out. All right, and I can change those values to whatever I want them to be. So if I come back over here, let's change this one to maybe like 200 and this one to like 6,000. All right, so this one should be really quick. Let's see, that one right there was really quick. And then this one should take forever. And there it is. All right, so you can see how those numbers are dynamically set. And if for some reason I don't have a data delay at all, it should just pop out right away because I've got no delay set. And that's what it does. Okay, cool. So that is working properly. Let's save that and head back over to the JavaScript. All right, now there actually are a couple other things we need to do. First of all, if I were to be able to pull out of this and then come back in, it's technically still observing. And actually, we've gotten rid of that console.log. So let's go ahead and set that in right here. So console.log, we'll just do the L. So now if I save, all of those should show. If I get them off the screen, then they should read again. And I actually might need my text back to show you this. So let's do that. All right, so here we go. So I get this intersection observer to start with. As soon as the page reads and they all say is intersecting false. If I come down here, now they all say true. If I pull back off the page, they say false again, then they say true, then they say false. In other words, even though this whole animation is done, this intersection observer is still doing work, even though I don't need anything else from it. So what I want to actually do is unobserve everything so that it's not still doing work in the background for no reason whatsoever. So let's come right below this set timeout. And here we'll actually just call the fade observer itself, and we'll pass the method of .unobserve. And what do we want to unobserve? Well, the target that it was set against, so L.target. Now hang in there, we've got two more things we need to set on this. So if I come over here, and now let's just double check this is working. Yeah, once it's already gone, then I don't keep getting this readout. So let's get rid of this console.log. Now there's two other things we can set here. Number one, there's actually some options you can pass in. Remember down here, one of those options is called threshold. And what this threshold does is it basically says how much of the thing needs to be on the screen for you to consider it as being truly in the viewport. So if we set this to something like 0.5, 50% of the entire thing would need to be on the screen for it to be considered to be in the viewport. In this case, I'm going to set it to 0.1. So I just basically need a little bit of it to be in the screen for it to be considered in the viewport. But if I were to come here, you can see that this top one still hasn't been triggered. All right, now it finally comes in, and so does this one. So you're actually setting this threshold, basically tells it, hey, when should I consider this is intersecting true? Now, the other thing I want to do, and this won't so much matter for this project, but if you're using this for other things, I think it's important to show you this. Because I'm setting on these styles here, an opacity, a transform, all this kind of stuff, if you've got transforms or other things like that connected to these, you actually might want to remove these classes as soon as this is done. So let's go ahead and do that as well. So this is still now inside this if statement. Right after I've stopped observing it, let's go ahead and remove all those classes. So I'll say L.target. We're going to add another event listener here, and this one will be called transition end. Transition end. It's a transition because fade up, fade down, fade right, and fade left all have transitions set on them. And when that ends, then what I want to do, and we'll do this in a little arrow function. It's going to get hard to read here, like this. I want to say L.target.classList.remove, and what I want to remove is my whole string of fade up. All right, and the rest of those. And then just in case I have more transitions that happen on these elements in the future, I can come inside of here and add one more argument here to any event listener, which is once true. What this is basically only listen for this thing one time and then basically just clean this up. So get rid of it so you're not still working and waiting for additional transitions. All right, so now if I go ahead and save that and I come down here and scroll down, you'll see now they should pop up. Let's see, let's refresh. Come down this way, and what have I done? All right, let's come in here. I think this actually needs to be a comma. There we go. Maybe? Yeah, there they go. Okay, but now they're not. Now they should remove. Let's just double check that they've done that. Let's see. Yeah, so they don't have that faded on anymore. If I were to come back up this way and refresh, they've got fade up. I come down here, and then they remove themselves. All right, cool. All right, so that is all set. And that's mostly all we're going to do with the animations as well. So I want to actually delay this animation the same kind of way, because if I were to come up here and refresh the page, it's doing that animation right now. And by the time I get down here, this number is already there and this is already there. So I actually want to delay those animations as well. So let's go ahead and add just a couple of things. First of all, to our HTML. So the couple things that we're animating here, this progress label itself, and then also, let's see what else. The progress container itself also has that after element. So let's grab both of these here and here, and I'm simply going to add data animate. So it's just another custom data class. Let's give this a space here. But what we're going to do is basically look up anything with this data animate attribute and say once it's in the viewport, then go ahead and animate it. Now just for maximum flexibility here, I can also add a data delay here. We'll set this to something small like 100 and basically delay this animation as well if I want to. Let's save that and then come over to our styles. And I want to also update the way we've done this. So You might remember, even though I had already had a before pseudo element right here, I added the exact same selector down here, and that's because I actually want this to say data dash animate equals animate. All right, so what I'm going to do is basically say, hey, in my JavaScript, whenever this thing is intersecting, add this as the value to the data-animate custom attribute. And whenever that is there, then go ahead and do this animation. So let's grab this right here, and let's go up top and do the same thing here. So now if I save this and come here, none of those things should ever animate because I have yet to change this to say animate. So finally, let's come back to our JavaScript and let's go ahead and add that as well. All right, so now being the second time we're doing this, hopefully you are a pro. We'll call this animate observer, and we'll say new intersection observer. And in this case, we've got to pass it a callback, and then we've got to pass it some options. All right, so let's just leave that alone right now, and let's go ahead and grab our animate else. So we'll say animate else like that. And again, we'll spread as an array here, document.query selector all. And we're going to select anything with the data attribute of data animate. Then we'll say animate else dot for each, and here we'll grab the element, and you can name that whatever you want. But for each of the things in this list, I want to pass it to my animate observer, and I want to pass the observe method and the actual L. All right, so now this should be sending it up here to this callback. Now maybe what we should do just for kicks is write this callback and these options outside of here, just so you can see you can do either way. So we'll say this animate callback, and then we'll call this animate options. And you can name those whatever you want, but I'll just keep it sounding similar so I know what they're connected to. So let's go ahead and grab this, and we'll say function animate callback, and we'll grab this options here. And all I'm going to do is pass in the same thing. So we'll say const, it'll just be a threshold. And again, this is an object. So I'll say threshold, and this will be, in this case, we'll do 0.25. All right, so let's save that there and come over here. And what I want to do inside of this is, first of all, grab any elements that have come in here. So we'll say else, these are the things that were passed in. And I'll say else.for each. And what I want is each of those elements here. Then let's go ahead and write a little arrow function inside of here. If the L is intersecting, so if that's true, if it's on the page, then what I want to do, and we're going to do the same thing we did up top. So maybe let's just copy this down like this. Actually, just the set timeout and the unobserved. So let's bring this down this way, paste that in, and I'm saying basically I want to add, in this case, not a class, but I do want to basically grab the data delay and make that as my set timeout timing. Also, this fade observer needs to be changed to this animate observer. And now what I want to do here is change this. So I'll say the target, so this is the element itself, dot set attribute. The attribute I want to set is the data animate, and I want to set this to animate. So let's save this and see if it works, and then I'll talk you through it. Cool. Perfect. All right, let's come up top just to make sure this is actually working off screen. Then I scroll down. It's not yet in the viewport, still not in the viewport. All right, now it is, and now it starts animating and moves up. Cool. All right, so what we've done here is we've said, hey, here are all the elements that need to be animated. They're marked with this data-animate, and then you're going to pass them each to the observer. The observer right here has a callback and option. So this time we wrote it outside. So first of all, everything that gets passed in gets sent to this function here. It runs it through all this stuff, asks if it is intersecting. Then it goes ahead and adds this animate tag according to whatever delay we've set. And if there is no delay, it just does it at 0. And then you'll see here that we've unobserved it so that it's no longer doing work once that animation is complete. And you'll see then I've also got some options here where 25% of it has to be on the screen for it to be considered is intersecting. All right, so that's all we've done. All right, so this is a completed project. We're going to call this good. There are several other things you could do. For instance, you can actually add a lot of the things that we hard coded in here. So like these max and value and even this ARIA label, you can add all of that with some kind of templating language, which is how I actually did this in the project I was working in, but I didn't want to set up a whole template just to show you how to do this. You could also add the amounts raised, the amounts yet to raised, and the total from like a database instead, again, of hard coding all this. You could add keyframe percentages with JavaScript as well. So if I come back over here, you'll remember that the CSS down here, we added a lot of these things, these nums, all this. You could add all that with JavaScript as well. So there's a bunch of ways to improve this project. If you have some of those and you want to show them off, I'd love to see those, but I hope this was helpful. I think it's one of those projects that shows you a bunch of different things, everything from like CSS counters to intersection observers to a bunch of custom data attributes. All these kinds of things work together to really build a nice project. And again, it's just kind of a little bit of whimsy to a site that is one of those things that keeps people coming back. Well, thanks again so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one. Happy coding.